Welcome. Today, we are going to dive deep into the neuroscience of addiction, motivation, and, of course, dopamine. We're pulling from an absolutely incredible conversation between neuroscientist Andrew Huberman and Stanford psychiatrist Dr. Anna Lembke. We're going to explore what might be the single most important mechanism in your brain, the one that controls pleasure and pain. And we'll see how our modern world has, well, kind of hijacked this ancient system, leaving so many of us feeling anxious and just unmotivated. So, how did we get here? And right there, that's the great paradox of our time, isn't it? I mean, we live in a world of just unprecedented abundance. Food, entertainment, information, you name it, it's all right there, instantly. So in theory, we should be the happiest, most fulfilled generation in all of history. But the data, well, it tells a completely different story. We're seeing soaring rates of anxiety, depression, and addiction. And this isn't an accident. It's a direct, totally predictable consequence of a huge mismatch between our ancient brain wiring and our modern dopamine-saturated world. So to really solve this puzzle, we have to start by looking at the world we've built for ourselves. We have pretty much engineered struggle, friction, and effort right out of our daily lives. Now, on one hand, that's brought us incredible convenience. But on the other, it's created this totally new challenge for the human brain, a brain that evolved over thousands of years to overcome challenges, not to just float along in a state of constant ease. This quote from Dr. Lemke just nails it. It perfectly reframes our modern struggle. For most of human history, just surviving was the main event. Our days were packed with necessary effort. But now, that external pressure is pretty much gone, and we're left in this kind of void that our brains often read as boredom or a lack of purpose. This creates a relentless hunger for stimulation. We start looking for that friction, and if we can't find it in healthy ways, well, we often find it in destructive ones. And here's the bottom line. It's all about this fundamental mismatch. Our brains are wired for a world of scarcity, a world where rewards were rare and you had to work really hard for them. But today, we're pointing a digital fire hose of high dopamine stuff directly at those primitive brain circuits. We're talking about the infinite scroll on social media, those hyper-palatable processed foods, endless streaming shows, online shopping, you get it. This constant, overwhelming flood is the real root cause of that paradox we started with. Okay, so let's get into the core mechanism behind all of this. It's called the pleasure-pain seesaw. And honestly, this is a brilliant and super simple model that explains what's happening in your brain every single time you experience pleasure. It's one of the most important findings in neuroscience for understanding motivation and really our mental health. And this, right here, this is the big aha moment. For centuries, we basically thought pleasure and pain were totally separate things, processed in different parts of the brain. But we now know they're two sides of the exact same coin. They're processed in the very same neural circuits. So I want you to just imagine a seesaw in your brain. This simple image is the key to unlocking the entire puzzle of addiction and motivation. Now, before we see this seesaw in action, we need to understand its number one rule: homeostasis. This is a core biological principle. Your body works to keep its temperature right around 98.6 degrees, right? Well, in the exact same way, your brain works tirelessly to keep your pleasure-pain balance level, or neutral. It doesn't want you to be wildly happy or miserably sad for too long. Its main job is to bring you back to a level baseline. So here's that seesaw in action. When you do something rewarding, let's say you eat a cookie, you get a like on a photo, dopamine is released, and boom, the scale tips down on the pleasure side. But remember homeostasis? Your brain does not let it stay there. It immediately kicks in with a powerful counter response, pushing the scale down an equal and opposite amount on the pain side to get things back to level. Let's just walk through a super simple, everyday example. You eat a piece of chocolate. For a second, dopamine tips your scale to pleasure, but almost immediately, your brain adapts by tipping it toward pain. Now, this isn't agony or anything. It's that subtle, quick feeling right after the chocolate is gone, that moment of, I want just one more piece. That brief little after effect, that craving, that is the pain side of your balance making itself known. Now, this system works beautifully in a world of natural, hard-won rewards. It keeps us motivated without letting us get stuck. But in our modern world, with all its easy, potent pleasures, this elegant balancing act is so easily hijacked, and that can pull us into a really vicious downward spiral. So what happens when you don't just eat one piece of chocolate, but you eat the whole box, or you binge watch a show for 6 hours straight? By repeatedly and forcefully slamming down the pleasure side of the scale, you force your brain into this defensive crouch. It's counter-response, that push to the pain side. It gets stronger, it gets faster, and it lasts longer. And eventually, your brain just gives up trying to get back to a level baseline and simply resets your neutral starting point to a state of chronic low-level pain. And this just illustrates the progression perfectly. The first time you do something, you get this huge hit of pleasure with just a small, brief come down. But as you repeat the behavior, the pleasure you get from the same thing starts to shrink, while that painful rebound gets bigger and lasts longer. Eventually, with chronic use, you get to a point where you get almost no pleasure at all. You're now just using to escape the pain of your new dopamine-deficient baseline. You're just trying to feel normal. This quote from Andrew Huberman captures the tragic result of this process perfectly. When your baseline is chronically tilted toward pain, the simple things in life, a beautiful sunset, a chat with a friend, a good meal, they just don't release enough dopamine to even move the scale anymore. As Dr. Lemke says, broccoli just can't compete. The only thing potent enough to move the needle is your drug of choice, and that leads to this devastating narrowing of what brings you any joy. So what does this dopamine deficit state actually feel like? Well, the symptoms are almost identical to clinical depression or an anxiety disorder. You feel this persistent anxiety, irritability, you can't sleep, you feel a constant nagging dissatisfaction with life. That's a state called dysphoria. And your mind is just consumed by intrusive thoughts about getting and using your drug of choice. Okay, I know this sounds pretty grim, but understanding the mechanism is the absolute first step toward fixing it. And the good news is that your brain is plastic. It can be reset. So now we're going to look at the science-backed protocol for restoring that level balance and learning to find pleasure in everyday life again. The foundational step, based on decades of clinical data, is a period of complete abstinence. For most substances and behaviors, it takes about 30 days for the brain's dopamine circuits to restore homeostasis. This is what people often call a dopamine fast. And it's not about eliminating all pleasure, but about abstaining from that specific high-potency behavior that has tilted your balance out of whack. Now, this is the single most important thing to expect. It is non-negotiable. When you remove that powerful external stimulus, you're basically left stranded with a seesaw that's tilted hard to the pain side. That withdrawal period is real, and it is the price of admission for healing. You have to be willing to walk through that fire, knowing that on the other side, your brain is recalibrating itself. So, here's a rough map of the journey. The first 2 weeks, they're the most intense. This is when withdrawal symptoms, that anxiety, irritability, that dysphoria are at their absolute peak. But if you can just push through, something pretty remarkable happens. Around week 3, as Dr. Lemke so beautifully puts it, the sun will start to come out. Your brain begins to ramp up its own dopamine production again. And by week 4, homeostasis is returning. Food starts to taste better, music sounds richer, and you can once again find genuine joy in the simple things. A 30-day reset is an incredibly powerful tool to get your brain's factory settings back. But let's be real, the world of endless, easy dopamine is still going to be waiting for you. So the final and maybe the most important question is this: how do you maintain that hard-won balance for the rest of your life? And this is the profound final insight. Our culture screams at us to find your passion, to chase those peak experiences. But that very advice can actually fuel the dopamine chasing that gets us into trouble in the first place. Dr. Lemke offers a pretty radical alternative. Stop searching for what you want to do and start paying attention to what needs to be done right here, right now. By engaging with the necessary, often difficult work of life, helping others, cleaning your space, facing a challenge, we build a more stable, more enduring kind of contentment. It's a fundamental shift from just chasing pleasure to actually cultivating purpose.